Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in. Hello, sir. How you doing?
Doing all right.
Cool.
Just sitting in my beautiful San Francisco apartment in the middle of an insane, decaying world.
By the way, I just heard it looks like Michael I might not win. I thought, man, that's scary.
Yeah, late votes came in, and it's down to the wire. So
Yeah, hope he wins. I mean, it's actually a good coincidence because at the end of last episode, we briefly hinted about San Francisco, and we should, get Gary or someone else on it at some point to do a dedicated episode on San Francisco. But you just wrote about blue cities and why there's a big opportunity to, if Democrats want to talk about fixing the country, let's start with blue cities. And you talked about how it wasn't always the case that blue cities are in the position that they're in now, that there was actually a time where they were much better. And so why don't we get into that case and maybe talk about how things used to be and what changed, what happened, and how do we get back to it?
around 2012, right? Cities like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Boston, DC, etc. These were the greatest places to live in America. These were just wonderful places to live. And I remember that era. We all make fun of the hipsters, right, with their little wax mustache and their artisanal bean to bar chocolate shops and whatever. But they were just one particularly iconic manifestation of an urban cultural renaissance that had happened. If you look at pictures of American cities in the 70s, it looks like they were hit by bombs. You see just huge vacant lots, buildings left empty, trash everywhere. They were just absolute hellholes of crime. It's hard for us to even imagine the amount of crime that city dwellers endured at that time. That endured through the 80s into the early 90s. In 1992, I think, New York had 2,245 murders, New York City. That's a war. Like 2,200 murders in a year in one city. That's insane. But that's, in the 70s, our cities became that way. And you've seen Taxi Driver, right? Yeah, Taxi Driver. You've seen this sort of like violent, alienated, dirty, corrupt city. This became how Americans thought of cities. And so if you talk to anyone over the age of like 35, you'll say the word inner city and they'll still know exactly what you mean. But that's a holdover from the 70s and 80s, right? When inner cities became these extremely sort of forsaken, dangerous places. And then everyone moved out to the suburbs, rising crime and then just sort of the attractiveness of suburban life made people move out. And this had happened, this had started earlier, right? Honestly, it started in the 1920s, but then it really picked up in the mid-century with the explosion in crime. People just abandoned the cities. And then there was this revival starting, I actually put it to the mid-80s, but it really only became noticeable in the 90s. People started moving back to cities. Why? Well, the first reason was a change in our industrial structure. So we had knowledge industries, IT, finance, business services, biopharma, whatever, even including government in like DC. And that really drew people back to the cities. You had the creative class. You ever read Richard Florida's The Rise of the Creative Class?
Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, it's us, man. It's us urban, like young upper class white city dwellers. Yeah. We sit here on our laptops with our little bunny mugs drinking, fancy tea from Nepal. I think my tea today is from Nepal. Yeah, so we're the creative class. I think David Brooks wrote Bobo's in Paradise.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you know that one?
Yeah.
And this narrative continued and intensified. We got, dating apps made it so that it was super easy to like meet people of your same social class and match with people of your social class, right? And then we got little shopping villages, so even if you had kids, you could like still go to like Pete's Coffee and some like artisanal home goods store and blah blah, like in Noe Valley or Coal Valley or one of these places in San Francisco. So these cities became great places to live. They weren't perfect, but they were really great. And also they were very diverse because immigrants piled into these cities, especially high-skilled immigrants to work in knowledge industries, but also low-skilled immigrants to do, childcare and construction and all the things that cities needed. really piled in like the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, right? And then and so liberals could point to these cities and say, look, these cities are super diverse, and yet and then crime fell, by the way. So in the 1990s, you had this massive drop in crime. So remember how in 1992 there were 2,245 murders in New York. By 2014, it was, I think, 230 murders in New York.
Was this Giuliani? What led to this change?
Well, Giuliani is part of it. I mean, like there, a bunch of mayors really cracked down. There was sort of a,
And is cracking down just adding more police, or what does cracking down mean?
yeah, adding more police. New York became the most policed city in the big city in the nation. They just hired insane amounts of police. They're on every street corner. And then they did broken windows policing, which meant that if we saw you creating a disturbance, we'll arrest you for some minor thing. So you better not do that. And then that also just removes the people who can't control themselves from the street. And then Michael Bloomberg came in and did stop and frisk, which basically got rid of all guns. Like, how are you going to enforce your gun control law unless you stop and frisk people? You're not. So he stopped and frisked people. And then, remember by 2020, everyone hated stop and frisk. And they're like, you're a racist, Michael Bloomberg. But that worked.
But stop and frisk actually worked.
It worked. Of course it worked. Yeah, because it got rid of guns. And then broken windows policing got rid of the disorderly people. I think broken windows policing was under Giuliani. Pardon?
Should we have given him more of a chance? Bloomberg?
Michael Bloomberg? Oh, yeah, absolutely. He would have been a great president. But anyway, whatever. Like no one was interested in that. Too short. Too short. He's a very short guy.
Yeah, yeah, short kings. Yeah.
Short kings, fine for New York, but not necessarily like, Ohio ain't necessarily going to go for that. They want tall. They want the Dutch. What we need to do is just run Dutch people. Pardon?
Oh, as I was just getting us back on track, but I was just saying New York crime decreased.
New York crime really fell. And that was the most spectacular fall in the nation, but it wasn't the only one. LA had a huge crime decrease. And San Francisco had a reason. San Francisco was never that murderous of a city, but it really decreased a lot percentage wise. And then there were a few cities where crime didn't really go down, like Baltimore, St. Louis, places like that. But those places, nobody cares about Baltimore and St. Louis, right? Baltimore famously was the subject of the show The Wire, which I've never actually seen because I kind of don't want to fetishize the crime problems of poor cities. I just want to help people not have that. But so it always felt like violence tourism. But the point is, people were able to watch The Wire and go, I don't live in that, because they were living in New York where it's safe and where people were acting like the cast of Friends or whatever, or Sex in the City, unfortunately. So that happened, and then you had all these shows: Seinfeld, Sex and the City, Friends, How I Met Your Mother, all these ones. Even Girls, which was the worst and suckiest of the bunch. But yes, some of those shows sucked, but like they depicted this wonderful urban life that you could live, and you could because crime was low, because knowledge industries gave everybody a job, because increasingly the internet allowed people to match with people in their own city and find people of their own social class within the city. But yet that way wasn't just sorting. Like people love to. Like in New York, people will mingle with people of different classes. Like maybe not in San Francisco, I don't know. But but there were all these cool things that you could do in cities, and the internet made cities cooler because it allowed you to more easily find cool stuff to do. Find that artisanal bean to bar chocolate shop in Bushwick or whatever, right? Williamsburg. Find the drink and draw and go to the drink and draw. Like you could just find anything and you could go to anything. And whereas in the past you had to be part of subcultures to really find some of these things. And so these cities were great. They were booming economically. People were moving in. This is all through the 2000s, right? People were moving in. They were great places to work. And yet they had already sown the seeds of their own destruction. Bum, bum. So they made a bunch of critical mistakes. And one of those mistakes was fiscal. So they started spending way, way, way too much money on everything. Sometimes this was for nonprofit groups to do stupid stuff, provide city services. They outsourced city services and the price would go up when you outsource it. Oh, we privatized it. No, the price went up because you're still footing the bill. You're just not monitoring the output. So the price went up. And then, or just overpaying overstaffed contractors. So there was this famous story in 2017, I think, called the most expensive mile subway track on earth. It was about the new New York subway line, which was basically like construction crews hired about 5 times as many people as they needed. It was a giant payola scheme. You wonder, why didn't they just pay themselves higher wages instead of hiring all those extra people? Because the extra people vote, and that's called clientelism. You essentially finding ways to pay people to vote for you with targeted government benefits. And so That is called clientelism. Anyway, the more people you have, the more power you have, because we have a one person, one vote system. Whereas paying yourself wages just gets you more money. And the guys who were doing the negotiations will get more money anyway, personally, because they're not the regular workers. Anyway, so there's a whole bunch of, it's quasi corruption. I don't know if I want to call it corruption, but it's certainly stuff the city felt comfortable paying for because there was this giant boom, and it felt like nothing could kill this boom. It felt like, the network effect is invincible. People will never move away. We can just do anything. We can raise city taxes. We can spend, profligately on super expensive stuff. We can make regulations so nothing gets built. So regulatory stuff was a problem. We started really over-regulating, and the story of why we did is complex. But in the 70s, we really started doing that, and by we never really stopped. So if you look at the amount of housing that places build, it's like Tokyo, like Paris, London, New York is in the basement, and so our city's built very little. This city looks like it looked when I was a college kid 20 years ago, right? And I would come into the city and see, San Francisco. It looks the same. Like there's a couple new built. There's Salesforce Tower that wasn't there, but this city looks the same. Nothing gets built, and so that was typical of cities around the country. And then so regulatory stuff and also NIMBYism, but like a lot was regulation too, zoning. And then the third mistake came later on. So in the 2010s, so those mistakes came early on, right? You started to see the cities spending too much money in the 90s, and they just got worse and worse over time. And then you started to, like, as soon as they could spend that much money, they did. And then you saw overregulation from the 70s. Like that was the problem the whole way through. And it just, as you got these knowledge workers moving into the cities, it got more and more of a severe problem. But it took a while for it to catch up, right? Cities were cheap in the 90s because they had been basically bombed out by crime, right? If you have 2,245 murders a year in one city, who's going to want to pay rent in that city? Well, a few people did. So you had the gentrifiers, famously gay people were the first people who would move into a gentrifying neighborhood. So real estate investors came up with this strategy of follow the gays, because gay people were less afraid of the urban crime and disorder, more willing to tolerate it. And therefore, when they moved in and like nothing bad happened, then the hipster artists would move in after them. And then the professional workers like tech people, whoever, would move in after them. And eventually, then you'd have a gentrified neighborhood. And then all the first wave gentrifiers would hate all the second wave and third wave gentrifiers. And so you had that, but it was all just gentrifier on gentrifier violence. And the poor people moved out because the rent was too high. Then in the mid 2010s, around 2014, you had the third big mistake. So the first big mistake, fiscal; second big mistake, anti-development regulation. And the third big mistake was what I call anarchy fair. Anarchy is a form of welfare. People just decided, let's be incredibly permissive toward crime, drug use, public disorder. Just incredible permissiveness in cities. You had the famous progressive DA movement, progressive prosecutors, like Chesa Boudin. You had laws like California Prop 47, which said that it's now only a misdemeanor if you only steal less than $950 of stuff. You had that obviously mainly affects cities. And then you had all kinds of just a lot of discretionary choices at the city level. Let's let the drug users use drugs on the street. And so if you look at, for example, drug overdoses, you see the nation, there was a rise, and then San Francisco, it's just like off the charts. And so property crime, there was like, oh, it's just property. You had leftists saying that kind of stuff. And that really made it to the, at the local level, leftists call themselves progressives. And so progressives are like, it's just property. Why would we want to let security guards shoot and kill a person who's just trying to steal to feed their family? And, and so you had restrictions on use of force to stop shoplifters. Guess what happens then? People shoplift the stuff, and then the stores close, and then the people don't, then poor people don't have anywhere to shop. So anyway, we'll get to that later, but I think that was the third mistake. So just tolerating, and then tolerating fare jumpers on trains. You had like these creepy fucking people on train, just riding free, because those people don't have the money to pay for trains, but they ride the train so they can leer at women and try to harass, intimidate women, and maybe get in a fight or maybe buy some drugs in the station or wherever. Like, it's people really, the idea that public transit ought to be free, ought to be a free utility instead of something people pay for, a service people pay for. Like that idea was very poisonous to public transit. So public transit became very dirty in the sense, when I say dirty, I mean scary people. Public transit became filled with scary people. In fact, dirty is not a great euphemism for that, because it's not dirt. It's people aren't dirt. but they can be scary. And so like the anarchy that prevailed after about 2014 or so really started reducing quality of life in the cities as well, until finally there was an urban crisis, and now we're seeing cities on the verge of bankruptcy from the fiscal problems. And then COVID hit and sort of knocked over this house of cards. It was sort of like, it was ready to be knocked over, but then COVID hit and knocked it over. And so people started moving out of the cities for COVID, but also because they were just fucking fed up with this bullshit, and they realized, like, I can go, like a lot of people aged out, like the big millennial generation sort of aged out of city life to some degree, or started to buy homes in the suburbs, just like their parents. And the idea that this would never happen, that the millennials were these, like, permanent rebellious teenage generation, it wasn't any more true for the millennials than it was true for the boomers. And now we've got The Big Chill. Did you ever see The Big Chill?
No, I never saw it.
Oh man, see The Big Chill. It's the boomer yuppie movie. It's all these guys who went to University of Michigan. And that's the thing. They're a bunch of UMich men and women, and they were all a bunch of leftist revolutionaries when they were in college. And now they've all just got normal yuppie lives. Like, a couple of them got, like, one of them is like a successful businessman. The other is like a successful, like, lawyer, I think. And then there's one who's a famous journalist. And then, they all gather together, and then they're just sort of remembering their college days, like, when they would just sleep around and have fun and be revolutionaries. And because their friend, who's Kevin Costner, actually killed himself. And it's implied, it's never said, that he didn't want to become a yuppie, that he didn't want the new world of the 80s, right? He wanted to stay in the late 60s and early 70s forever. I mean, these people are like early 30s people. Millennials delayed this a bit longer, but eventually the same thing happened. I just remembered, these two guys are going for a jog, and that one guy turns to the other guy and says, "Back in college, do you ever think we'd make this much bread?" And then I see that everywhere, among the millennial generation. And part of that is not wanting to tolerate urban crime and disorder. So baby boomers in the 80s really were like, why am I tolerating urban crime and disorder? And so then now millennials are like, why do I tolerate urban crime and disorder? So there's this echo of the past. Millennials following in the footsteps of their parents.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to try to find the ways to do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. It's easy to see why the Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Econ 102 at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 40,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days, not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to your immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. That's netsuite.com/102.
There was this group called the Capital Steps. You know the Capital Steps?
No.
Probably never heard of them. They were this group of satirists, Washington, D.C. people who would sing parody songs. They were like Weird Al Yankovic, but for politics. And they would They would sing songs. And I remember this parody, when I was a little kid, my parents would play this for me. And I remember when I was like a little kid, it was like, I don't know, 1992 or something. I, I just remember hearing this song, and I can always remember all songs. And it was a parody of Like a Rolling Stone by Bob Dylan. Do you know that song? Like a rolling stone, how did it feel? Anyway, that's the cold open right there. Is me singing Bob Dylan even worse than Bob Dylan. But it's just about, anyway, the parody is about these boomers, becoming like suburban drones, and it's called Like a Suburban Drone. So I'm looking, I have the lyrics somewhere here because it's like impossible to find. But then it says stuff like, but now you go out to dance in a yellow tie and polyester pants. Now you talk like your dad. Now you wear a mattress plaid and say, do you want to barbecue? How does it feel to have a cellular phone and a colonial home? Like a suburban drone. How does it feel to be a 90s man with a Miami tan and be a Reagan fan, a Republican? And I feel like the millennial generation just went through that, at least, a substantial portion of it. People are just like, enough with this bullshit. I'm just going to vote for Trump.
And you also, as you mentioned, in the local elections, there was some change as well.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, Aaron Peskin didn't win mayor, but I don't think anyone really expected him to. But a number of the progressive supervisors were given the boot, and we'll wait for the final results to see exactly how many of them were given the boot. But then, Proposition 47, the thing that made shoplifting a misdemeanor, was repealed, and now it's a felony again. And then there were just a bunch of other like tough on crime things. The progressive DAs are all getting recalled and losing. Like, who are they? Like Gascon in LA. I think Krasner in Philadelphia, he might still be there. But then Pamela Price lost. I think about half, nationwide, this election kicked out about half of the so-called Soros DAs because the Soros Foundation.
How did they even win in the first place? Is it the power of Soros funding machine, or is it that the voters sort of fell for their promises?
Sure, you need funding to run in local elections. Like, funding matters more at the local level than the national level, right? Because at the national level, like the national institutions, like the big media, helps you a lot. And the National Party and all these things, and then PACs. But at the local level, like, funding is the only thing that gets you attention. Like, money gets you eyeballs. And then, so of course, people like Soros funding those progressive DAs helped him a lot. But I think you can't, Soros doesn't control people's minds any more than any rich donor controls people's minds. Essentially what I think happened was that crime had been low in these cities, and crime was like going down and down and down. And people just thought that this was structural, that we have this surplus of safety that we can afford to spend, this infinite surplus, and that like we can afford to be permissive toward criminals and whoever, basically criminals, because nothing can derail our invincible cities. And I think that was also the case with, this is the common theme I see through the fiscal stuff and the regulatory stuff. It's like, we don't have to build housing. Everyone, like, it'll be fine. Like, we don't have to have balance our budgets, or we don't have to actually control costs. We can afford to pay like ridiculous amounts of money for a mile of subway, and it'll be fine, guys. We can afford to outsource everything to nonprofits. It'll be fine. There was this attitude in the 2010s of like, it'll be fine. Like, cities will be fine. That just like, cities are this way, like endowed by God with just paradiseness. And that turned out not to be true. It turned out that the way those cities were very nice in the 2000s was highly contingent on a lot of stuff that cities had done to come back from the devastation of the 70s. Low crime was a result of diligent efforts, including massive amounts of policing and incarceration, to lower crime. Like, crime just didn't go away. And people told themselves all these things like, oh, it was lead, it was unleaded. We got rid of unleaded gas, and then crime went down, blah, blah, blah. They told themselves it was just like bounty from God. Like, we got rid of lead, and then crime went away. It was just lead, guys. But then when you look at meta-analyses, lead explains like around somewhere between 0 and 10% of the crime decline. That's what the hard-nosed research tells us. It's not nothing. Get rid of lead pipes, that'll be fine. But it's not, or oh, it's just abortion. We legalized abortion, and then all the criminals got aborted. That turned out to be wrong research finding. It was coding errors, and the people who built their careers around that startling finding were wrong. They built it around a mistake, and they got really popular, and they did Freakonomics and got millions and millions of dollars, and it was a mistake. In fact, we don't really know why crime fell, but I think increases in policing and incarceration probably had a lot to do with it. You put the criminals in jail and then you don't have crime anymore. But yeah. Anyway, I could go off on that tangent, but the point is that cities really had to work hard to balance their budgets in the 70s. Like New York almost went bankrupt in 1975. And so they really had to do that. Regulation, cities never actually deregulated, but the point is that crime made housing so cheap for a while that all the older housing stock, like the Victorians in San Francisco, got really cheap because nobody wanted to live near crime. And when crime went away, there was a lag before the prices caught up, in which you could actually live in the Mission for super, super cheap in 2002. And all the hoodie-wearing rebels that created Twitter and whatever, they went there to be bohemians. You lived the bohemian life. Tech was a bohemian thing. If you didn't want to work for, Microsoft or Oracle or any of the big, tech companies of the time, you didn't want to work on the peninsula and wear a tie to work. You would come up to San Francisco and you'd put on a hoodie and you'd just code, fun apps that would let people, that would give a voice to the voiceless and let everyone share their opinions. And that was Twitter, right? It was a bunch of bohemians. They would go to raves. You read the book Hatching Twitter and it's like they're all going out raving. The Burning Man culture grew out of that. Now it's like a bunch of, middle-aged people, sort of doing drugs at Burning Man, but and undercover cops at Burning Man. It's kind of dead, and the real actions moved to other parties. But yeah, that was the bohemian lifestyle, and you could afford that because it was cheap, because crime had bombed out the cities and made no one want to live there. And then suddenly hipsters were willing to move to the cities, and crime decreased, but there was a information lag. People didn't know that crime was low by 2002, crime was pretty low in a lot of these cities, but people didn't know that. It wasn't low in the international sense of Europe or Japan, but it was low, very much lower relative to what it had been. It was usually about a 3/4 decline, between 2/3 and 80% decline in crime. That was a big decline, right? That's big. And so that increase in safety took a while to percolate, but it made stuff cheap. And so you had the hipster bohemian gentrifier era of 20 years before rents caught up. And so it was just total profligacy, total complacency. The idea that you had infinite money to spend and you could be infinitely permissive to crime and nothing bad would ever happen to you. And, it's then bad things happen to you because people were refused or were unable to look through to the consequences. Have you ever heard the expression finem respice?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's a Latin phrase meaning think of the consequences. Think of what will happen if you do this. If you become more permissive in crime, think of crime will go up, sir. If you regulate housing, so that no one can build any housing, it will get more expensive. If you just keep spending money, you'll more and more, you'll eventually go bankrupt. If everything costs way too much, you'll eventually go bankrupt. Think to the consequences, but they didn't. Cities lived for the moment, and now the moment has caught up with them.
Let's talk about the crime thing for a second, because there's this dissonance where you see in the stats crime going down, well, at least in San Francisco, but you also see stores don't want to open or stores close down, or I guess, how do you explain this dissonance a little bit, right? Where people either feel less safe or stores are actually, closing down. Is it possible that maybe crime is down because people are reporting it less, or because people are, I don't know, spending less time there or something? Or
so crime's down nationwide from 2020, 2021, way down. But that was a big increase. So, it went up and then it went down, and it's not quite down to where it was before it went up, right? It's still a little bit higher. It's way down over the last couple of years. And this is the theme of the entire Biden years. Everything, got worse in 2021, and some things got worse in 2022, and then everything got better in 2023 and 2024. And I guess it wasn't long enough for people to care, or they cared about other stuff like wokeness. I don't know. But this is the story of the Biden years. Everything's gotten better recently, but it got worse for a while, and it's a lag before people understand these things. Then there's certain areas. So property crime in San Francisco is still incredibly high. That's still way higher than it used to be. That increase started in 2014 or thereabouts, and then that has continued to increase, and maybe it's fallen a tiny bit this past year, but it's it'll be a long time before we get a control of that. And so first of all, murder is different. So murder primarily affects like young men in very poor neighborhoods. Like in America, yeah, like you're not going to get murdered. Like a few people do get murdered. Like there was that product, I think, Facebook product manager in the Mission who accidentally got shot in 2020 in a gang fight. Right? It was Crossfire. Very few people get murdered. And then you had like a murder of a rich tech guy. It turned out to be another rich tech guy who was mad because he was like sleeping with his sister or something like that. There was some sort of honor killing by like really conservative Iranians. Like that's the kind of murder you get among like rich people. Like, but the property crime is absolutely pervasive. It's like your packages will get stolen, your car will get broken into, blah blah blah. You've got to just like have your house be a fortress. Like stores get looted, so there's like no stores downtown. Property crime is off the charts. You know, murder's down. Like I care more about murder than I care about property crime, but that doesn't mean I don't care about property crime. And then there's urban disorder, which doesn't even rise to the level of like a prosecutable crime, which is just like, I mean, I guess there is like maybe doing fentanyl on the street could get you prosecuted, but like that's not really how you stop it. You stop it by just like, say, kicking people off the street. And there's you know, homelessness. Homeless people are primarily victims, right? They're victims of expensive housing, and then they're victimized by crime. Like most homeless people are not criminals. Most of the people who are criminals are like, you know, meth heads who actually have homes who come out to victimize the homeless and like rape them and take their meager possessions and beat them up or whatever. Like the meth heads come and prey on them. Maybe some of the meth heads are homeless too, but like a lot of the meth heads are not homeless. The point is that like it's meth heads. It's not, but people always say, oh, it's the homeless. I got attacked by a homeless person. Like it probably wasn't. It's probably just a meth head. But regardless, like the police aren't doing anything about it. Then they did because of Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping came and, you know, and then they cleaned up parts of the city. Like City Hall, the area in front of the City Hall still has like no, like homeless people, street people. It did like during COVID, they were like all over that like lawn, all that stuff. Now you go out, there's like a line, there's like an invisible line with like those little statues and whatever from Civic Center to the City Hall, from Civic Center Station, from like Market Street around like 10th or whatever to City Hall. There's like a little place where there's like, you see like street people on the street and then none. We can control this stuff, but we don't because we think anarchy is a form of welfare, and being permissive toward bad street behavior is a way of making our city a welcoming place for everybody. In truth, it makes it a welcoming place for nobody. It just pollutes and destroys the commons. And we've had this tragedy of the commons.
Yeah.
What do you think? Tell me, you live in San Francisco as well. And you moved here, what, a year ago?
No. So I moved here in 2014, but then during the pandemic, I spent time a couple years in Miami, and before that, I was in Arizona for a year.
Sure. That's right. You're in Miami. But then you moved, when did you move back?
Yeah, so I came back about yeah.
A year ago. And then have you perceived, but even before then, you would visit a lot. Do you perceive a decrease in disorder in the last a year and a half in SF? Because I do.
I do. I will say, when I when I moved here, I actually moved in the Tenderloin. Like I lived in the Tenderloin for 2 years when in 2014, and I was like, this is, not great, but like I would walk around and like it's manageable. And then I don't know if it actually got worse or if Twitter just made it seem worse, but now I couldn't even imagine, walking through the Tenderloin as much as I did, like at night and alone or, this kind of thing. That said, in the year and a half that I've been here or come back, yeah, it hasn't, at least where I'm at Hayes Valley, Potrero Hill, Russian Hill, the Mission. It doesn't seem that bad. So I find myself, telling people, when people say, "Oh, you live in San Francisco, how do you do it?" I'm like, where I'm at, I don't see any problems. Yeah, if you go to the worst parts, there'll be some, sort of homeless people that look like zombies, which is really sad and unfortunate. But other than that, like I don't see any break-ins. I'm not, nothing's happening to me. Now I do have some friends that have had house break-ins and stuff like that. But yeah, as they say, crime don't climb or something. So
You don't hear that much about home invasions in SF.
just a couple.
Yeah. Like in Ann Arbor, I knew people who had their homes invaded.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Oh yeah, I knew two cases of home invasion in Ann Arbor. But then I don't know anyone in SF who's had a home invasion. Yeah, so I mean, maybe because the houses are constructed differently, it's hard to get in, or maybe like Yeah, I don't know, but I have seen people just stripping a car in broad daylight
Yeah.
many times. Like I haven't seen someone smash a car window, but I've heard it, but I haven't seen it. But then, yeah, like I've seen people stabbed. I've seen a couple people aftermaths of stabbings with blood on the ground, and those were homeless people, probably stabbed by either other homeless people or just by druggies. They were like guys on the street said the wrong thing to the wrong person. Someone just came up and stabbed them. They're bleeding out. The paramedics are there. I've seen some assaults, some random assaults in SF.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Hey everyone, Eric here. You know, at Turpentine, we're always looking for ways to streamline our work. That's why we use Notion for all our internal documents. It's been a game changer for us, and I want to tell you why. Notion is this amazing all-in-one workspace that combines your notes, docs, and projects. But what's really cool is their new Notion AI. It's like having multiple AI tools built right in. You can search, generate, analyze, and chat, all without leaving Notion. What sets Notion AI apart is how it personalizes responses based on your content. It's not just another generic chatbot, it understands the context of your work. Plus, it can search across thousands of docs in seconds, even connecting to tools like Slack and Google Docs. And get this, Notion is used by over half of the Fortune 500 companies. Teams using it send less emails, cancel more meetings, and save time searching for their work. It's designed to keep everyone on the same page while protecting your privacy. Want to give it a try? Head over to notion.com/upstreampod. That's all lowercase. Notion.com/upstreampod. You can try Notion for free, and when you use our link, you're supporting our show. Give the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI a shot today at notion.com/upstreampod. Our sponsor for today's episode is Carta, the end-to-end accounting platform that's purpose-built to power the strategic impact of the fund CFO. For the first time ever, private fund operators can now leverage their very own bespoke software that's designed from the ground up to bring their whole portfolio together, enabling formations, transactions, and distributions to flow seamlessly and accurately. The end result? A remarkably fast and precise platform that empowers better strategic decision-making and delivers transformational insights on demand, timely K1s, holistic fund performance data, and so much more. Come see the new standard in private fund management at carta.com/investors. That's carta.com/investors.
Has San Francisco always had this homeless problem, or when did it really get worse?
Actually, San Francisco always has, but on the West Coast, it's gotten worse a lot worse since like the 2010s. In the 2010s, it got really bad. But then San Francisco, it's actually a very long-standing thing. San Francisco is it's actually the second densest large city in the country. San Francisco is a much more walkable city than LA, than Seattle, Houston, even than Chicago. Like San Francisco is more walkable than Chicago. Sorry, Chicago, like the 5 Chicagoans that listen to this podcast will be like, no, not Chicago's the most walkable. Shut up. Anyway, you have good pizza though. I like that. Anyway, San Francisco is the second most walkable city in the nation. And so that, and it has the best weather. So if you're going to sleep on the street, it's the place to be because you can panhandle, because there's a higher foot traffic density like downtown, and because you can sleep outside because the weather's okay. I mean, like it gets cold at night, but like not that cold. And, it's always pretty much the same temperature year round. It's dry. It doesn't rain. Like you can't sleep on the street in Seattle. Like it rains. I mean, you can, but you have to find a nook or cranny and cover yourself with a bunch of, oily stuff. It's real hard to sleep on the street there. And New York has seasons. New York will get snow. Like really, it's really hard. The weather makes it really hard to sleep outside for much of the year, but San Francisco doesn't. So our geographical characteristics and our urban development pattern made San Francisco always a real homeless magnet. Also, there was the hippie era. San Francisco has always been extremely permissive. It compared to other cities, it can get less or more, but it's always been like if the tech people manage to like take over San Francisco and like crack down and do a Giuliani on this place, that will be the first time. Like that will be new. That will be the first time that ever happened. Whereas in New York, it's happened. It goes through cycles, right?
Is it Giuliani possible in San Francisco, you think?
Sure. I mean, we don't have as strong a mayor, but we can hire more cops. We can just get really tough DAs. We can have more state funding for prisons, and we can just do broken windows policing. We don't necessarily need stop and frisk because we don't have a lot of guns in the city. We do stop and frisk in the Mission, and all the norteños and sureños, will get stopped and frisked, I guess.
Does SF have like a really bad gang problem? Like, is it like actually
We have almost nothing. We have so it's interesting. I looked into this. There are 2 gangs in San Francisco: the norteños and sureños. They are, Latino gangs. The Sureños means Southerners and Norteños means Northerners. The Norteños territory is to the south of the Sureños territory, and that really irritates me. But the Norteños are much. They're a less violent. They're a higher class gang than the Sureños. And so have you ever noticed that the area around 24th and Mission BART stop is has a lot less like homelessness and disorder and like whatever than the area around 16th Street Mission BART stop?
No, I haven't taken the BART a ton, so I haven't noticed. But
Yeah. If you walk around the Mission, you'll notice that there's a dividing line. I forget what the exact dividing line is, what the street is that divides it. I think it might be 21st. I don't remember. But then there's a dividing line, and then south of that dividing line, things are a lot cleaner because that gang is a lot, more friendly to local businesses and people. Where they're less violent. They're just anyway. Those two gangs fight, and if you're on the border between those gangs, you could get shot, but you won't. That one guy did, but it's like not that many shootings. So like that's our one gang area is like Mission Street, but it's like not much. You probably won't even meet those guys.
so whoever there's not like if someone threatens to do the things that you mentioned, they're not like at personal risk or so. There's not like a huge you know multi-billion-dollar drug whatever mafia or something. Like there's not like we don't have like a paramilitary in San Francisco or something.
Right. We do not have a paramilitary. We do not have,
These are just like common criminals who can
like a lot of that stuff is some of that stuff is real. A lot of that stuff is fake. MS-13, that's a real gang. MS-13 is basically defunct now that Bukele put all the MS-13 people in a giant prison. Like he's like, oh, you have a tattoo. Your new home is prison. And then like the MS-13 people got very prominent tattoos and they all got the same ones. And then they're like, oh, tattoo, prison. And then like the MS-13 here has been cut off. So it's just like a local, like ethnic Salvadoran gang that will, disappear eventually. And yeah, there's various like Mexican mafia and a little Central American mafia stuff. But that's what the Norteños and Sureños are. They are mafia. They're gangs that primarily form in prison. We could actually, the most important thing we could do to stop gangs in America is actually have prison be more solitary. Like if people just sat around in prison and like wrote their dissertations and talked to GPT in a comfy room like they do in like Sweden or whatever, instead of just going out and breaking rocks in the yard together and like doing push-ups in the gym together and like doing drug deals and arranging their crime empires through like corrupt guards and that they pay off, and which is the way prison is now in America. If we made prison a lot more solitary, they wouldn't have a chance to do this, and prison gangs wouldn't form, and we'd kill our gang problem mostly. Yeah, it's prison gangs more than street gangs. And so then when they get out on the street, of course, there's people who are affiliated with these gangs, but there's not like leadership that's outside. The leadership is all in prison. Like those people are all prisoners. And so it's like, throw the leadership in prison. That's where they operate from, the prisons. And so like the people outside are just like little young people. And then to the degree that gangs are violent, it's because it's just the young people are out of prison because they haven't gotten arrested yet. They haven't gone to prison yet. And like, are guys that get out of prison and then go recruit more foot soldiers on the street who eventually go and do their time in prison, which is a badge of honor. And then like, then meet the senior guys in prison and then they're in the gang for life. And it's prison where these gangs operate. It's not like, they don't have like some like apartment building in San Francisco that like they control with like machine guns and blah, blah, like in, the Philippines or Jakarta or some shit, right? Like, it's not like that. These things about, oh, the Venezuelans took over this apartment building. Well, yeah, maybe you have some like Venezuelan guys living in an apartment building who are affiliated with a gang. That can happen. But like the leadership's all in prisons. No one understands any of this stuff, like because nobody cares enough to read about this stuff. Like you can just read. There's a bunch of posts on like Medium about this. I don't know why. But yeah, there were like people will write these things or Facebook posts. Like there's groups where people just like post this stuff or like old forums. You can go from like the 2000s and look in like, like local forums and just watch people just talk about these gangs and how they work and all this stuff. Wikipedia is probably a resource you can tap. But yeah, so like if people are just like, they just imagine these gangs, they don't imagine how the gangs actually work. And then most people, when they imagine gangs, imagine like smuggling gang, like the economics of like drug sales, starting with overseas, like the growers in Colombia then sell to the Mexican middlemen who then, distribute it by street gangs, and then guys with pagers on the street are like shooting each other over turf. Like, yes, there is that exists, right? But then you can throw all those guys in prison and then they have a prison gang.
Okay, so let's segue to the Blue City revival. Like what's we talked about sort of the problems and the history. What's the game plan?
The game plan is that basically you just elect people who will be more like the Michael Bloomberg types. You elect people who will be tough on crime. You elect people who will control costs, who will do all these things. With crime, you basically just have to crack down on crime. Pardon?
Like, can they be Democrats, or do we need like Arnold Schwarzenegger, sort of Republican?
I have no idea. I don't really know how this stuff works. I don't. Maybe Republicans can make a comeback in California. Maybe they can. It's probably different from city to city. Like in some cities, you probably do have like Republican mayors and whoever supervisors who can get elected. But then in some cities, it's like everybody's so, everybody in California thinks they're a Democrat. And so you have like Democrats versus other Democrats. So I don't know. I'm not an expert in these partisan politic things. But then I do think that it's really important to control costs. The way you do it is you bring stuff in-house instead of just cutting everything off and just destroying and just not building infrastructure, just not providing city services. Some city services you can probably get by without. Like some city services are just like support for drug dealers, and you can get rid of those things. But like most city services are necessary stuff, like education or housing stuff, just like. And then infrastructure is really important. Like you need stuff to take people from place to place. And so bringing this in-house, having bureaucrats who do this, is often the solution, and not outsourcing it to consultants, nonprofits, and whatever. Like actually, my instinct is to say that Democrats will be more willing to beef up the bureaucracy than Republicans will be. Because the Republicans will be like, let's just not have the city do anything. Let's just cut it all, slash it. And then people get mad because there's no infrastructure, there's no services, and then they elect progressives again. Whereas, sort of state capacity types will actually build up the city's capacity to do stuff cheaply instead of outsourcing it expensively to these, grifters. And so I think that's why I'm a little more optimistic about Democrats doing some of this stuff. The problem is that sometimes if you never have Republicans win, then there's no like external threat, like, guys, we better clean up our act or else these guys will win. There's the threat of actual urban deterioration and decay, but that, as we've seen, takes decades to play out, and it can be very destructive. If you have the Republicans, you can say, guys, we need to be stronger on crime or else the Republicans will win next week. And so let's toughen up right now so they don't win next week. And so I think it's a shorter cycle of like threat and getting serious with a two-party system. So I want a two-party system. And at the same time, I think it's more likely to be Democrats who build up state capacity that we need to replace the grifting nonprofits and all those people. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
But I don't know what the balance is there. Like, I don't know how to get any of that done or where that can get done or who will do it. Like, I have no idea. I'm not a partisan politics guy.
Right.
I just hope Grow SF continues to win in San Francisco.
Got it. Okay, so basically what you're saying is the plan for Blue Cities is basically like Bloomberg-esque sort of leadership.
Yeah, and I think that's what Grow SF wants. Basically, you have a functional high capacity city instead of the approach of like instead of the approach of a city as a cash cow to be raided, which is the progressive approach, or the city as a just something to be defunded, like which is one prominent Republican approach. So I know there's actually lots of really good Republican like mayors who will they're like moderate Republicans or governors. Like that's why talking about this in partisan terms is so hard, because it's so local, right? You'll see Republican mayors that actually want high state capacity and are reasonable type of people who don't just want to defund everything. You'll see those all across America, especially in red states. I think in red states, you're more likely to get a responsible Republican mayor because everyone thinks I'm a Republican. And so like in Texas, you'll get that, and wherever, Oklahoma.
Maybe talk a little bit about the difference between blue cities and red cities, and maybe it's too broad of a term. But I guess we've been talking about blue cities this episode. Like, what is the state of some prominent red cities, or how are they doing?
Red cities are doing much better. They're building a lot more stuff. They're sprawling more, but some are densifying. So like cities in red states often vote blue, although less so this cycle, a lot less so this cycle. They still voted for Harris on balance, but they became more balanced. But then you see Houston is like one of the champions of densification, because Houston has this micro neighborhood control system where basically your few city blocks get to vote on whether you have apartment buildings. And some people want apartment buildings because they make more money that way. And some people don't want apartment buildings because they have more noise and, whatever, dirty, icky people, I don't know. So then, but you control it at the micro block level. And if the people 3 streets down want to build some apartment buildings, you don't get to say no. They get to say yes or no. And so it's actually leveraging local control for YIMBYism. And Houston, like there's the famous like Houston apartment building. I wish we could pull up pictures for this podcast, but it's like a low-rise apartment building it's great for density. You don't need anything dense in that. It looks like what they have in Japan. Houston has built a train line. There's a train in Houston now. That's pretty cool. It just runs like, one way. It's just one line, but it's cool. And so Houston is turning itself slowly into like a real city, even though it's a red state city. So we could call it a red city, but it votes blue on balance, I guess, although it has lots of Republicans there too. But it's a healthy city. It's doing well. Houston's doing well. It's all in a giant flood zone and may get destroyed by global warming. But other than that, it's doing very well. And so what other cities are doing really well? Arlington, Virginia is doing well. Seattle is doing well. Seattle's a blue city, right? Seattle is building a bunch of housing. They did have anarchy period, but I think they've swerved away from that. Portland's doing terrible. Portland, just like all the hipsters went absolutely feral. Like all those people from Portlandia just became complete zombies. And are now,
And so if you could wave a wand, let's say we get this Bloomberg-like leadership in San Francisco or LA or et cetera, is the main interventions that you'd be most excited about are housing and crime, or housing and policing, basically?
Yeah. So fiscal, housing, and crime policing are the 3 things. Those are the things we need. And we get those things, city get fixed. That's it.
Yeah. And let's say we had, Michael or Gary or Sachin or one of these sort of SF, people dedicated to fixing SF on the podcast, which let's do that soon. What would you want to ask them, or what questions do you think we'd have for them, or what are you curious about?
How do you control fiscal costs? How do you deregulate to get housing, and how do you crack down on crime? What are the specific things that you can do, and what are the political barriers to getting those done? Like, why haven't we done those yet? I can speak in general terms about sort of complacency and this complacency that developed, but in terms of like actual interest groups that block things, actual political structure, like too many powers on the board of supervisors, whatever, like they'll get into the nitty gritty of those politics things too.
Yeah. I hope Josh Shapiro or whoever is the future of the left can take on some of the intellectual foundations that people like you and Ezra and Derek Thompson have laid out with sort of the abundance.
Yeah, Shapiro absolutely can.
Yeah. Because I think do you see that starting to happen, or do you think that's possible?
I see it starting to happen. I even saw Harris try to pivot, and no one paid attention or believed the pivot. But yes, I saw her try to pivot hard toward that, and I think that's not the end of that, right? Harris will go down in history as being affiliated with wokeness, not as being the person who tried to pivot to centrism, because no one really noticed the centrist pivot and the patriotic pivot. And you saw this with like Walter Mondale. Walter Mondale was a centrist, but got pegged as a leftist, and Reagan absolutely crushed him. And then Michael Dukakis was a centrist who got pegged, somewhat half pegged as a leftist, and he got pretty crushed by George H.W. Bush. And then Bill Clinton did what those guys were doing, but communicated it better, and then he won.
Yeah.
And then so, yeah, like that. Yeah.
It is interesting, I don't know if this is actually going to happen, but Trump had this video the other day where he's like, let's get rid of Department of Education and let's just leave everything up to the states. And I wonder if that's indicative of his approach more broadly, which is more will just be left up to the states, which, I mean, what we're talking about is even more important because local governance will have more of a say.
Republicans always are gunning for the DOE, Department of Education, because it doesn't really do much. Like education's already reserved for the states. Like the states do all the schools, the curriculum, all that stuff. State universities, we don't have federal universities except with the military. We should, but we don't. We don't have federal universities. Basically, the DOE, they're going to try to get rid of it because basically, like, they think it's woke, and it's like telling local people to be more woke. It's not going to, like, they provide funding for stuff. They give people money to go to college. It will weaken college. We need to do a whole other podcast about the institution of college and how Trump could actually change that and how that is changing already in our society from various other changes that have nothing to do with Trump. And so that's a huge topic for another day. And I will write a post on that fairly soon.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited to read that. What's the give us a little bit more of a cliffhanger. What's the thing the intervention you're excited about, or what's the main idea?
Well, college became our one functional institution. For the 40% of people who go to college, it's like it became, church and community organization and bowling league, and it taught people how to like live in a community and how to relate to each other and how to like have functional relationships and have morals and all these things, how to be healthy and all these things that community or institutions like church used to teach, right? Or it totally replaced institutions that were local. We delocalized our society, and the car and the internet delocalized our society. College became our one functional institution, and then unfortunately it was subject to a lot of the same complacency and profligacy that cities were, the progressive cities were, and started just wasting a ton of money, which meant it had to charge students way too much, so it overpriced itself and was not prepared for the sort of like end of that gravy train, which is now over. And so the age of college is now winnowing. We're going to see that's the biggest change. I think the diminishment of college is this institution, or it will still be important, but it will be less important. And we need other institutions, especially if we're going to unite the classes, if we're going to like have America be healthy again. People don't go to church anymore. Well, they never really went to church all the time, but they're not members of churches anymore. Local institutions, people bowl alone. College was the antidote to that, but it only worked for 40% of people because we gatekept it according to intelligence. Then we tried to stop gatekeeping it, but that failed with the test, getting rid of standardized tests. And so anyway, there's a teaser preview, but basically college became like everything to the educated class, like everything. And now it's diminishing, and the educated class is going to have to deal with that, and America's going to have to deal with that, because we need institutions that unite the classes. We need people like you and me to spend time with working class people in our youth and in adulthood too, but youth is more important because it's formative, and learn what working class people are like, and get a sense of national unity that we don't yet have. Just voting for Trump every 4 years or another Trumpy type of candidate is not going to provide national unity by itself. We need institutions that provide cooperation and commonality on a day-to-day basis, and that teach consensus morality and health, and provide community. That's the preview.
That's a great preview. I have one last question before we get you out of here, which is, this might be a stupid question, but is there also a private sector sort of solution or sort of supplement on some of the crime stuff? For example, on the national level, we see things like Palantir and Anduril and companies that help sort of enable, or in some ways, serve the role that public, SpaceX, of course, served the role that NASA used to in some capacity. Our friend Growing Daniel is doing a police startup. Are there private sectors? Do you see people getting like blocks organizing to get security, for their block? Like,
no. I think that there'll always be contractors and stuff like that. Like, Daniel's company is very useful, but I think that there's a state monopoly on the use of violence, and when you start seeing private security take over from public security, it's a problem, because it means public security is broken down. You must have one organization with the guns, and that's the cops. So no, I think contractors, yes. Providing services, working with the city government, yes, but you need state monopoly on the use of force, or else you have anarchy.
Yeah, no privatized police force. Otherwise, it can be used against us. Yeah.
And well, more importantly, it'll only be used in a few places, and the rest will just become anarchic zones. Anyway, all right, got to go. Until next time.
Great stuff. As always, until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and erictornberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.